Good morning and welcome to WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. No one makes New Haven tick more than Caroline Tanby Smith. For so many reasons, including those we've talked on our show, you would need an advanced math degree to keep count. But we don't have an advanced math degree, we have microphones. And Caroline has joined us in the WNHH studio to tell us about a great new book she has published. It's about one of the defining issues in New Haven, an issue in which she has a unique perspective, town and gown. I always love that phrase. I love that, like, what I'm just picking, people picture like wearing Levi's, dungaree jackets, and like these gowns and caps. The book is called New Haven and Yale. Welcome back to the studio, Caroline Smith. Great to have you.
Thank you so much. And
we want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, Caroline, the book is called New Haven and Yale. How'd you come up with that title?
I guess two thoughts come to mind. One is that it's really specific to the content, but I think actually a place in which I was pretty intentional was putting New Haven first, because oftentimes when the topic comes up, people talk about Yale and New Haven. I thought it was pretty important to put New Haven first.
What made you want to do this book?
Well, so the essence of the book, just for folks that don't know, it's a written collection written by about 14 individuals about their stake and their experience in the New Haven and Yale relationship. And I think for me, what was valuable and what was important was two things. One is that when I think about the history of the city of New Haven, I know that it will be deeply affected by the history, the pain, and the promise of the New Haven-Yale relationship. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about that. But I think one place to start or to further or to invest in is in storytelling and in perspective sharing. Because I think one of the one of the most damaging parts of the divide between New Haven and Yale is perspective sharing, is the opacity, is the...
Is that a long way of just saying we don't listen to each other? We don't know each other?
Well, I wouldn't put, I think there's something correct about that we don't listen to each other. I think that also potentially puts some blame on the individuals. And I think it's also in part systems and institutions that create walls that don't afford us the ability to even have the opportunity to listen to each other.
Institutions are made up of people. But often people, when they're in larger institutions, are battling with forces that inexorably grow out of lots of individuals doing small pieces of a larger project. Now, I've always wrestled with that.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about corporate greed and you get all mad at corporations, corporations aren't people, despite what the Supreme Court says. I'm willing to say that. But people make decisions at corporations that affect people. But when you know the people, they might feel they're trying to do their little part and make it right when it all adds up together. Like the way countries act out of fear and, let's say, start a war in Afghanistan, or just because they're upset about 9/11, and there are all these forces that make leaders feel they have to do something, or in Iraq where there's no evidence there's any connection. So
yeah, and I think I was just talking about this the other day with John Martin. I think it's like the fundamental human project is to see other people's humanity and see the humanity of other people. And
that's the hardest thing in every issue we talk about in town. Cops and when people say, I don't think you should call cops pigs, because like when people are upset about police misconduct, which I am, we feel that the root of it is not seeing police officers, not seeing people in the community as humans. But then when you're calling a police officer a pig, you're doing the same thing back and dehumanizing.
Definitely, I think that's a Brene Brown expression, is like any form of dehumanization doesn't lead to just outcomes. And I think just whenever I think for me, whatever comes up when we talk about the dehumanization of cops, and there's an understanding I have of that response, because for so long, people of color, women, immigrants have been dehumanized for so long. And I think that always should be important when we talk about also the dehumanization of the other side, usually white male-bodied people.
And that's so interesting that you identify that at the core of the 3-century-old tension between town and gown in New Haven, and that you address in your new book, New Haven and Yale, by not writing it yourself, by having 14 people you've met on both sides of the divide tell their stories. So did you record them? Did they write them?
They wrote them, yeah. So I wrote it. It was compiled by me and Elizabeth Larkin, who I think's been on this show. They work at Youth Continuum. And we wanted to get a broad range of perspectives, with the understanding that this particular compilation is not representative of all perspectives by any
Mm-hmm.
means, but a beginning to a conversation. And so we reached out to a lot of our friends, people we didn't know too. We wanted to get a sense of people, former Yale students, people who are currently Yale students, people who haven't stepped into a Yale building before, people who work at Yale. So we tried to get a broad range of perspectives. But again, it's just a sort of a beginning, and we hope that it sort of furthers other conversations and other spaces where these conversations can happen.
All right. Well, this conversation is happening on Dateline New Haven at WNHH, your home for Community 8 103.5 FM, live streams at newhavenindependent.org. Caroline Tanby Smith has put together a great new book. I've read it. I was moved in one sitting about New Haven and Yale. And Carol, I'm going to ask you to read one of the 14 excerpts now.
Okay.
And I'm going to duck out for half a second because I've been unsuccessful in getting the attention of our station manager about something. But if you could just tell us what you're going to read now and whose story it is.
Definitely. I think it's also important to acknowledge that ideally the individuals who were dedicated time and invested time in writing this would be reading it. So I am honored and cherish the opportunity to read for them. So this is by DT. I grew up in New Jersey in a family that wasn't my family. I was adopted into a white family. There's nothing wrong with being adopted, but it was hard to be the only black person in the family, and I struggled with mental health issues as a kid until I got into athletics. Sports gave me friends, a place I belonged. I went to college at Southern Connecticut State University on a football scholarship. As a student at Southern, there were a few Yale students doing internships, environmental events, Save the World events. I ran into more Yale students at Toad's Place, where I was at the club. It's pretty obvious who goes to Yale. You can tell. With the guys, it's about their hair, how neat and taken care of it is. Yale males sound softer than other men. With the ladies, it was a little tougher. The girls like the same music, dance hall, trap. Yale students go wild at the club, but New Haven just goes to house parties. New Haven and Yale party different. Yale students are outgoing at night. When I went out with New Haven people, it was about dominance. Who's top dog? Who looks the freshest? Who's got the most juice?
Mm.
The first time I ever got arrested was in my sophomore year of college. My girlfriend went to jail while I was kicked out of my dorm. I just turned 20 and I was homeless. I was sleeping on the bleachers, trying to get my grades up, trying to make it to football practice. I tried so hard and I picked up my grades, but I had so many absences due to court that it made it impossible to catch up. I was suspended for 11 days, but my mom couldn't come get me because she was out of a job. My dad's car broke down. I was stuck. So I was staying with this girl and her family looking for a job when she stranded me with a dead phone a couple towns over. It took me 2 days to walk back. I showed up to her mom's job to ask for help, and I guess I looked pretty bad. So her mom called the police on me. I got arrested and went to jail. After I got out of jail, nothing was different. I was homeless in jail clothes. I didn't know where I was at. Anyone look at me knew that I was in jail, but they didn't know what my charges were. I could have been a murderer. My ID was stolen. I had no money. If anything changed, it was the way that I felt about Yale. When I was in school, I was going to the same places that Yale students went. It got harder to talk to them because of the way I was looking. Even though I was the same age, I felt like they were older than me. They were what I was trying to be, at a good school, getting my life right. Students at Yale have their life perfectly set out. It made me feel more alone. You rarely see Yale students hanging out by themselves. They're always with each other, going to class, going home. I was homeless for 7 months after I got out of jail. I was trying to make it to court, work. I had 2 jobs, and I was so exhausted I passed out at work. I started smoking weed again to deal with the stress and have the stamina to be on the streets and not care. I got kicked out of a shelter I was staying at. The rules are stricter than you think. I was on the streets again, sleeping at the mall and abandoned houses. I was back at one job trying to save up money. In the winter, I slept in an abandoned house wearing a leather jacket that reminded me of my childhood. I got it for my birthday before I became homeless. Afterwards, that jacket was my shell. I rarely took it off. I felt like it was attached to me. The pockets are all messed up, but I still wear it because it was so representative of a time in my life. That spring, a few weeks after I got housing, I spoke at a panel on youth homelessness hosted at Yale. I wore that jacket to the panel because it made it easier to talk about it. It made it easier to remember where I was versus present day. I got into a rapid rehousing program, but even that was tough. I'd look at apartments, meet landlords, but nothing was coming through. When my 21st birthday was a month away, I picked up the pace. An apartment came through. Now I'm in the house and I don't even go outside anymore. I can open my fridge, I can lock the front door, I can close the door to the bathroom. I can cook for myself. Now I'm working directly with Yale students to open a student-run youth shelter called Y2Y New Haven. I'm on the Youth Advisory Board at Youth Continuum, an organization in New Haven that helps youth go through homelessness. 2 Yale students, Ariella and Esther, sit on the Youth Advisory Board every week. They're a little quiet. I can tell they work hard and they are loyal, but I don't think I have a lot in common with them. What allows us to work together is a common drive to accomplish our goals. They don't go too fast, we don't go too slow. Last month, I went to another panel at Yale where Ariella and Esther were speaking about youth homelessness. I was really proud of them for standing up for youth who are struggling so much. Nobody thinks this is perfect, but I think the New Haven Yale relationship could improve if people talk to each other and were more real with each other. Every problem can be solved with the right people.
Whoa. That is an amazing piece. Caroline Tamby Smith was just reading aloud from a new book she and Elizabeth Larkin have put together as editors called New Haven and Yale. It's about the relationship between the university and the city, as told by 14 very different people they know who represent so many different facets of it. Caroline, that was that was a powerful, powerful piece. I felt this first way I read it when I hear it again, and and you talked before you read it about how when we hear each other's stories, that we stop being people who yell slogans at each other or get mad at each other or just are convinced in a broad way that certain people are bad and certain are good and you can't fix something. And all of a sudden you see their humanity. When you see this person's story, you feel so deeply for it. Now, was it he or she, DT?
I actually don't know what pronouns they prefer.
That's one thing. I was reading the book, I was thinking so much because you have drawings of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized you see it through your eyes because you put together the book as, are you a millennial? How do you define your generation?
I'm 26, I guess.
I think that's millennial.
Millennial, yeah.
And I'm a baby boomer old fart. That's the word for old fart. And, one thing that's been so much fun for people of my generation, it's been mind-blowing the way your generation has changed the way society looks at gender.
Mm.
And how I've lived with my own kids too, teaching me this, and how we see it so binary.
Mm.
There's males and females. Done.
Mm-hmm.
Not only, and then forget even talking about like what goes along with each of that. And reading a lot of these where you had drawings where it's unclear what the person's gender is and that there aren't only two. And that's not always so important to define people that way. It was part of that was the experience for me of continually needing to be reminded not to see people in that binary way. And in a broader way, this piece is saying, like, look at someone who's been homeless and how he felt or she felt going to the ex's mother and having the police called on you. I mean, this is deep on so many levels, like the way when you're arrested for some nuisance charge, and so many cops are starting to understand this. I don't know if institutionally it's going to get there, and court system, how you jam up people with charges for nuisances, that it makes it harder to fix their problems and harder for society to fix their problems. So I just thought that alone, I just wished when I read this and then heard you again, that every single person in New Haven could read that, in addition to the book, just that piece alone. And it's a good day that we're talking about that, Caroline Smith, because last night, the end of the piece talked about the Y2Y shelter, right? And this is a new youth facility for young homeless people that's going to be built on Grand Avenue. And last night we found out it got the needed approval, so there's no more chance of stopping it except for unforeseen problems like financing or something. So it got a final approval from the City Plan Commission. It was very contentious. A lot of people don't want that in Wooster Square. What role did stories like the one you just read play in getting that approval?
That's an incredible question. I think a few things are popping up for me. One, thank you for your sentiments on DT's piece. Again, just reiterating that I wish DT was here to read it. I think, to me, Y2Y New Haven is an incredible example of the kinds of projects that we want to see, or I want to see, and I want invested in the city. But I love the way that DT talks about it because it's not easy. It was a complex way that they delineated the relationship between having Yale students on the youth advisory board and DT being on Yale campus.
Right. We saw it from the perspective of someone who was actually homeless, who saw his or her brilliant observation of how Yaleys and townies are different at Toads. The town people she feels like are trying to show dominance in a bar setting, and the Yale kids who maybe come from a position of privilege and already feel like, without even consciously, they're dominating society, so they don't need to prove it at the bar. I don't know, and they just need to let loose because they live under this incredible achievement pressure.
And I think that's right. And, and I think that one of the reasons why Y2Y was something that I wanted to advocate for and fight for, there are a myriad of reasons. I mean, it's an incredibly innovative model. They have youth centered in their leadership, but I think something that just particularly was special to me was I think one of the number one things we can invest in as a city is creating mutual spaces where Yale students and New Haven residents can build power together towards a vision for the city collectively. And it's going back to what we were talking about listening. I think one of the reasons why listening is hard is because a lot of those spaces don't exist. And Y2Y built a space where not only could residents like me be very clear and concrete about the values that I have for the neighborhoods that I care about and the city I care about, but also a space where Yale students could deeply be a part of that in a rigorous,
And it's
healthy, and robust
it's
way.
interesting how Yale fits into this. So Yale and Yale affiliated people were instrumental in trying to get this institution started. The same way with Columbus House in the early 80s when there was a homeless problem surfacing in New Haven. Coming out of Dwight Hall at Yale, working with ministers in town, they founded the homeless shelter, and the Yale kids were volunteering. And then you had people who opposed it in the neighborhood, who were sort of middle class, working middle class, who kind of, they see that strip of Grand Avenue, they see a lot of social service places. So for your Yale person who's idealistic and you want to address problems in town, you want to see more places to help people. Some people, but not all, and this is a broad brush, we learned last night there are plenty of other people feel differently. Some people very strongly that they own a property, they don't want the value run down, they feel there shouldn't be social services concentrated where they live rather than in suburbs as well and other places. And they resent Yale because they say Yale they blame Yale for its position in New Haven and its role in high taxes because so much of our property is tax exempt. That's a complicated question, but that's how they're feeling. And then they see Yale kids who they feel, they call them kids even if they're adults, young adults, who they feel come in and want to fix social problems at their expense. And obviously that's one way of looking at it rather than expense, how a community solves problems together. And so they'll see Yaleys as saying, you're coming in here wanting to save the world and solve problems where I live, and then you go off to your own life of privilege, and then I got to live with the results. So there's all those tensions underneath. But then you have DT who comes in, who was very excited about the Yale students who worked with DT, and also had input as someone who was part of it.
I mean, I think if so I have a lot of thoughts, but I think if there was a kernel of truth in the opposing or the individuals who opposed the Y2Y project, I think like what would it look like for Yale as an institution to have it as an institutional and clear priority investment in New Haven? Because to me, that's very clearly not happening right now. And what are the policies? What are the procedures? How would the leadership look differently if they really reflected that possibility of an institutional priority? I think a lot of my thinking in the past few years as a Yale alum, now I've been in New Haven for 10 years, my 5th year reunion was about 3 weekends
ago. Did you go?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I've never been to one. You went? Okay.
Yeah, I went.
You felt okay about going to Yale? Okay.
I did.
That's great.
And
I despise the place.
You despise Yale?
Yeah, I do, but never mind.
Why?
Well, my experience, I just felt like, I had a good experience there, met my wife, but I kind of felt like it was, and maybe it's different now. I felt like it was a place teaching people how to run. There's great opportunities to learn there, which I did, and wonderful people, but I felt like it was an institution that's designed in every way from top to bottom to teach people how to be an elite class that bosses around the rest of the country to accumulate wealth and have their design be an aristocratic class.
Why did you stay in New Haven?
I loved New Haven from the second I got here.
Yeah.
So I just fell in love with the city, and when I was a student, I really gradually just ended up spending my time off campus.
I have a really similar arc. I don't know when you
Although I went now 78 to 82, but I learned how much people hated Yale, and I saw my own biases as a Yale person come into how I saw the city. I had very arrogant views, and maybe I still do, about people from the city sometimes when I thought I was on the right side of an issue and somebody was on another, like an issue like this one. Not hearing their stories enough, but as a reporter, I got to hear them. And so, yeah, it was a different city then. Yale was different. Yale institutionally actually had a period doing what you just said. When Rick Levin became the president in 92, they said, okay, for our institutional self-interest, by voting ourselves off from Yale, we're hurting ourselves. We're losing leading students and professors to Princeton and Stanford because of the reputation of Yale. So we have a new president, fix it. So it wasn't out of the goodness of the heart. It's institutional self-interest. And he was trying, the new president, to fix every problem the first week. And some things are hard to fix. So they came up with the home buyer program, which is great, where every level of Yale worker can buy with help get a home in New Haven. Has some unintended consequences, like sometimes driving up prices, but it got a lot stabilized neighborhood, help custodial workers be in own homes and solidified neighborhoods. They did They did promise New Haven later. But I think they've kind of gone backwards a little bit on that. But even if Yale were to be a more responsible corporate citizen, we would still have youth homelessness. There are larger trends in society, and those problems are going to be in cities, and we do have to figure those out.
If I may ask, what do you mean by that? They've gone backwards in recent
Well, I
years?
think there was a period under which the president of Yale had an order to fix the relationship with New Haven, and sometimes because of the different power bases, Yale was still trying to dictate how things run, and it didn't work. But other times, it really did work, like the homebuyer program, or in secret ways the public doesn't see. The leaders of the two, Yale and the city, had to learn through mutual respect how to work together, and they would fix a lot of problems just by calling each other up. Like something's going to go broke, and Yale come in and help and buy the property, whatever. And it was more mixed how they did their real estate investments, but they still were trying to help solve problems. And they had at the administration level, they had a vice president who became vilified in New Haven and did some stuff I don't agree with. But his mission was to deal with the city, so the city government people and activists actually knew whom to call. Now Yale does not have a vice president really focused on New Haven. The position doesn't exist. The president is a wonderful man and likes New Haven, has always lived here. It's not a big part of the agenda. There hasn't been an initiative for 10 years. Like, there are sorts of great initiatives going to happen. Like, can you get the police department in the home buyer program, for instance? Or also such schools. There's no one. They were actually trying to think for about 10 years or 15 of ideas of how Yale and New Haven could work together at every level to make the city stronger and the university stronger. And now that initiative isn't happening. There's really neither the city or Yale are they really talking regularly about how to come up with new ideas or put them into place. And the Yale Corporation does not have anyone with that charge or anyone coming up with New Haven policy. They have people who have positions as associate vice president, nice woman, really nice people who show up at public meetings, explain things. They don't have any juice, and it's not the directive from on high.
I think that's really interesting. I think what I'd add is it's almost more of a sort of it's about outcome, but it's also about process. Because I think about one of the kind of issues has been around the lack of decentralization of power. Like I almost feel like Yale coming up with ideas or how to support the city.
They didn't do it. No, they didn't do it alone. They would get ideas of the city, and they would talk to. Everybody kind of knew the people. You might still be mad at them, and they didn't always act right, but everyone was talking for a while.
And I guess that would be exciting for me in the future, right? I think this prioritization of power sharing, that the institution is not the holder of the ideas or the solutions, but as a truly collaborative part. Because I think that's actually not negotiable for power to be shared. And for power to not be centralized within.
So you and your cohort, the 14 people in this book, and the people who are your age in their 20s are doing fantastic things in New Haven. If this were 1996 or 7, you would be so incredibly busy because your phone would not stop ringing from both city government and Yale, asking you to come in and give them more ideas and feedback, try to buy you off and give you a job to put them into place, which would be complicated. Try to get a feedback of what you and in your 30 people in your circle are going to think about this and try to make it happen. Yeah, it was interesting. God, before that, there was the Christian Prince murder, which changed everything. In Hill House Avenue, a guy named Christian Prince, as though it were come out of a script writer from a very privileged Baltimore family, is on Hill House Avenue, a block from the president's office. A 14-year-old kid from Louisville robs him, shoots him to death. National news, exaggerations about New Haven. And that's when the corporation decided we're in trouble unless we have a better relationship with New Haven. Before that, Bart Giamatti, who was the president, he had his own idealistic reasons about pure research and the academia being separated from the crass commercial dictates and popular opinion. He decided Yale really shouldn't be influenced by what happens in New Haven, and they got him to start Science Park, which was Yale-funded research that would help create jobs and stuff. And he said when he signed it, "Don't ask me for anything again." And his successor didn't even know what Science Park was when you interviewed him. He never visited it. Then you could say there's a downside. So Rick Levin came in. He wanted to fix everything in New Haven and do it with everybody. They started an Office of Cooperative Research that would commercialize Yale inventions to try to have businesses grow here that would hire local people. And the other side of that would be if Bart Giamatti were still alive, saying research shouldn't be dictated by commerce. It should be for the greater good. So it's complicated.
Definitely.
But anyway, we were supposed to be talking about New Haven and Yale, the book that Caroline Tanby Smith and Elizabeth Larkin have published, which I think everyone in New Haven and everyone at Yale would love to read, because you get into the lives of 14 people on either side of the town gown divide and give us so much stuff to talk about. And I'm sorry I took us so far afield on that one, Caroline.
I think that was me.
So when did the book come out?
Sorry?
When did the book come out?
We completed putting it together, I think, around a month ago, in May, a month and a half ago.
And are people buying it?
Yeah. So all of the proceeds go to the Youth Advisory Board, which DT is a part of at Youth Continuum. And yeah, I think we feel really open and creative around where people want to take it. If people want to have a reading, or if people want to write their own versions, or challenge it in some way, I think that the hope is that's what happens.
So, can you get a dollar figure in your mind at some point so that a philanthropist can do two things: to buy enough copies to give to every Yale student, and buy copies to give to every New Haven public school student?
Wow.
If you come up with that number, it might not be as big a number as you think. And maybe we can start to understand each other. Mark Abraham writes in, because property values are doing so much better, I think Yale is not publicly asked to invest in New Haven as much as it was years ago. It's a really interesting observation. It always is interesting to know if Yale is now investing in the city through other channels instead, such as VC. And he says, P.S. the book is amazing, great work. Caroline, what year did you graduate from Yale?
2014.
You came from Kentucky.
I did.
Land where everyone in polls hates Obamacare and loves the Obamacare program that has a different name.
Right, exactly.
Subject for a different day.
Yeah.
Okay. So you stayed in town and you worked for See Click Fix. You worked for you did a lot of community organizing for bike riding in town, Yetis to dig out people couldn't dig out from snowstorms. You now run CoLab with Margaret Lee, where you help seed. You do an amazing job of getting people from both sides of the divide who have ideas to start businesses and give them advice and a little grant money to get them up and running. Is that a fair summary?
That's a very generous and fair summary.
Okay. So before we get to more on that, can you read a second excerpt from New Haven, Yale?
Definitely.
That DT story is just mind-blowing. But a lot of them are, actually. This book is just fantastic.
So I was thinking about reading from a Yale student perspective. Her name is Kat, and I think she just graduated. By the time when she wrote this, she was a Yale senior from Ann Arbor, Michigan. My experience living and studying in New Haven stands in stark contrast to my experiences in other cities. Studying abroad during my sophomore year and the following summer drove this recognition home. Being in Berlin and Shanghai without the safety net of the Yale institution, without any sense of spatial or social grounding, helped me realize how artificial the relationship between student and city is, and how Yale perpetuates it. Yale College advertises its campus as an undergraduate community, as perhaps one of its greatest selling points, but as a result produces an insular environment that inhibits the student body from productively engaging with New Haven and the permanent residents around it. From active efforts to prevent the student body from moving off campus to high walls around residential colleges, Yale does little to set a foundation for cultivating a healthy relationship with New Haven. Due to, not in spite of, the ample resources that Yale readily provides for its students, they are unable to effectively assimilate into New Haven as an urban space. As an example, Yale students often find employment through the Yale Student Employment website. All jobs posted on the website are sourced from Yale-affiliated employers, be it research at a grad school or working at a Yale administrative job. To hire Yale undergrads, new employers would have to take on student workers who would only be available during the August to May school year. Most students rely on the crutches of Yale student employment to make money and rarely venture outwards to find employment where they will be actively and routinely engaging with New Haven residents. Even in a non-academic setting, Yale students are given the most resources to seek non-academic pursuits within the institution. From waking up into Yale's neo-Gothic dorms to eating in Yale dining hall, students rarely spend any waking moment outside the confines of their campus. Not only are leisure moments spent within the gates of the elite institution, but even social spaces are catered to building exclusively peer-to-peer relationships. Unaffiliated establishments like Toad's understand this ingrained necessity for insularity and advertise the most popular Yale student club nights as exclusive for their peers. Yale students often share unpalatable stories about the few instances where they may have had sour interactions with townies or QPAC students, further reducing their desire to mingle and step out of their comfort zones. The act of constant othering and dehumanizing is dehumanizing those who is hard to undo. Increasingly, Yale University seems to be endorsing the formation of healthy relationships between the students and their city. The Dwight Hall Urban Fellowship, which provides substantial student support for local urban public service organizations, has increased in applications year after year, along with the focus, focusing our conscious urban service on New Haven pre-orientation program. However, there is something more fundamental to the divide between university and city. Opportunities, programs, and volunteer services can only do so much when the very lifestyle that Yale promotes is one of full integration into the university in all facets of life, one that does not allow a minute of a student's day to leave the physical and mental gates of the institution. Why is it that conversations addressing Yale students' inability to venture past Elm and Dwight focus on the city's safety, and not Yale's attempts to hobble its students within its own walls? No wonder Yale students are not comfortable enough to step outside of the university's spatial boundaries. Yale normalizes a life that is contingent on the institution. I want to reorient the conversation between Yale and New Haven to focus on how the appeal of such a wholesome, all-encompassing undergraduate lifestyle actually hinders a healthy, thriving relationship between city and university.
Caroline Tanby Smith here is reading excerpts from a new book she has co-compiled called New Haven and Yale, a book that I would recommend for everybody in town on either side of the town-ground divide to read or straddling the divide. And she's talking about that here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH 103.5 FM, live streams at newhavenevent.org. I have to admit, that was my least interesting piece of the 14.
Huh, why?
I thought it was very good. She had definitely good observations of how the university works. I was a snobby old person because she's actually smarter and more aware than I was at her age. I feel like she's making general statements based on little pieces of information. For instance, it's nothing new that Yaleys are involved in focus programs like that. I can name you going back to 100 years, where there are always a contingent of Yale people who did look behind the gates and get very involved locally and make difference in institutions. And they have always, Yale provided, suggested you stay only on campus, but there are also big gradations over time. Like when I was a Yale student, they told us at the police had an orientation where they say don't go more than a block or two from campus. When I lived on House Street, my friends from campus did not know where House Street was, a block or two from the campus. And while there's a lot of that still, it changed. There are gradations over time, and it just read to me. I didn't hear really any first person in there. I felt like sometimes, and I was much, much more so than this woman who's very smart and seems like a wonderful person. I was an idiot in college, and I would have like great thoughts out of this, like, really ideological perspective where I fit observations in and make grand statements about the good guys and bad guys. But I guess I felt like the rest of the book for me told me the stories of the people that showed so much more gradation. Like you had an employee who works in a white collar job at Yale, but so many subtleties about ways he felt. I think his name's Josh, part of Yale, but in some ways he could never be part of Yale. And part of New Haven, and part of going to Yale makes them not part of New Haven. And given that what's changed a lot since my day is Yale's now the biggest employer. So it used to, Yale and Yale New Haven Hospital have more employees now than the next big 8 largest employers combined. In the middle of the 20th century, New Haven went from being a manufacturing-dominated economy with a huge phone company where everybody can work. So now if you want a good union job or a job with good benefits, even if it's not a union, you have to work at Yale and New Haven for the most part. Whereas in the old days, everybody was trying to work at the phone company or at Sergeant's, where it's more robots now.
Yeah, I agree that, definitely in Kat's piece, I hunger for the eye.
No, it's important to have Kat because you have to hear all perspectives.
Right, but I think something that I deeply appreciate about her piece is the sort of articulation of the narrow way in which Yale has built what a relationship with New Haven could look like. So, for example, a lot of it centers on service, which is can be a fairly unidirectional relationship. And I think to me that's incredibly limiting. There's such a span and such a fan of what a relationship can be. Like for me, for example, I don't know if this is true with your wife, but I fell in love in New Haven mostly because I fell in love with a person who had grown up in New Haven. And,
I don't know that she would have stayed here if we weren't married. Yeah.
Right, and so
she loves the city, but
right, and so when I think
we were going to move at one point, and then when she got involved in stuff, we didn't move.
Love that. We'd love to hear more about that. I think it's, I guess, in a service relationship, the opportunity for a friendship, different forms of relationship, aren't as acknowledged and aren't as present, and those are some of the richest, deepest. Like when I think about me and Margaret's relationship in building Collab, that's one of the most intimate relationships you can have.
A business partner.
A business partner.
That's a
like
marriage.
We spend 9 hours every day together.
It's a marriage.
It's incredible. And I love it. And it's like hard and good and all. And there's so much trust building that's involved there. And I am concerned, and I think this Kat articulates this, that a focus on a service relationship is just a very limited form of the expanse of relationships that Yale students and New Haven residents can clearly form with each other. And so I'd be more curious about investment in spaces of friendship, spaces of building power together, spaces of relationship, which I think is actually really the sort of the fruit of trust building that leads towards like broader change.
And it's amazing how you've made that possible. Because when we've covered stories, when you put on display the people who have ideas for new businesses, and you have a big packed room at like the State House, it is such a great variety of cool, interesting people who are just working on stuff from town and gown. I mean, you really succeed in that. And you just convinced me, by the way, 100% her piece was good and should have been in there. I think I'm overly critical of young, idealistic Yale students because I'm embarrassed of all the idiocy I thought and said for so many years that it cuts a little bit too deep.
Sure.
So if you can give me a little break, I'm sorry, Kat. I'm very happy you're in there. How come people's last names aren't in there?
That's a good question. I think a form of agency, and so some anonymity, so that they could have agency and be able to say this is them. I mean, it has a drawing of their headshot.
But is there less agency if your name isn't associated with it?
How so?
Because you're not really responsible or have the power to own it. What you said.
Yeah, I'm down for challenging the name. I think in part it was just allowing them. I guess our thought was just allowing them to.
Be free to say whatever. I mean,
yeah,
you're talking to
have
someone.
A little bit more flexibility and freedom, and then and be able to pin their last name on it by the sort of act of sharing it.
And I'm a hypocrite for asking you the question because I run a website which, contrary to what some people ask, I let people comment anonymously. So I know it's a complicated question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in anonymity. But I also think there's a stylistic choice there. In literally the way just like a first name. I think because I think one of the goals of people leaving this book for me, which is why we actually avoided in part asking individuals that were, I mean, I think a lot of these individuals are actually like very well known, but there are a lot of people that we could ask, and I think we were curious, or I was curious if maybe reading something by someone that you don't know, or maybe you question whether or not you know them, allows you to place yourself in the story more. Because what I felt after reading each of the stories is I could see myself a little bit in every single story.
Me too. And that shows what a successful book it is.
And that felt real. And I mean that speaks to all of their hard work and also just the power of perspective sharing. And so I maybe a hypothesis, which again could be challenged, is that by not having their full name, by not having them be fully known, you can allow yourself to place yourself in their stories a little bit more easily.
Jackie Phoenix.
Jackie.
I'm very sorry if I mispronounced your last name, which you probably did. Caroline is amazing. That's all capitals, but no exclamation.
Jackie submitted a story in this book.
Oh, she has a story in the book? Oh, I shouldn't have said the last name. Okay, we'll read another one. Now, you also didn't have photographs, but you did have drawings. Who created the drawings and how? They seem to be in a similar style.
Yes, I created the drawings.
Well, very good.
Yeah, thank you.
And how'd you do it? Did you work with a photograph, with a computer program?
Yeah, so I love this program called Sketch, which is essentially like a Photoshop or Adobe InDesign competitor that's really, really easy to use. We can encourage our ventures to use it. It's great. And then base it off of a picture. And I think that was also just a stylistic choice to represent folks in that way.
And you know, you do so many things in New Haven, Caroline, that I feel like I would love to talk to you for about an hour on the air about each of them. Like, for instance, you run the downtown community, the Worcester Square community management team so well, and talk about town gown. But I think if we start talking about that, we're not going to be able to get back to the book. So, and I love all that stuff you do. But I want to ask you about what you've done about creating your own book. So this is the third book you have self-published.
Yes.
I have absolutely loved all of them. They've actually been very meaningful to me. And all three of them are different. So the first book you read, once a month I think it was, you read a different chapter of Doug Ray's book, City, Urbanism and Its End, which I think is the best book ever written about New Haven.
Yes.
And it's deep. And it's a little bit hard work at times about all the data you get through, but also great stories about how the New Haven urban core developed, changed over time, how it fit into the national picture. And then you took a different chapter and reflected on what it was saying and how it works out now, a couple decades after the book published, and what you see in New Haven. So I recommend that. And then you went a totally different direction and wrote about your mother
Mhm.
and her life in Korea
Mhm.
growing up. And it maybe is a way, again, trying to understand something, right? When you
Mhm.
do these books, you're trying to understand something.
Mhm.
You're trying to understand the city relationship that you were, town that you were such a part of in the first book. You're trying to understand your mother.
Mhm.
And now at Yale, New Haven, what gave you the idea, when you're so busy, to self publish books as a way to probe these issues?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I walked in with the intention of self-publishing books or even a focus on books as a medium, but I think with the first one, City, it was, I really liked what you said about each has been an attempt to deeply invest and explore in a really personal way. These
And
are
in a
all these are
humble and open way. You don't present yourself
yeah.
as an expert, you present someone who's listening and thinking.
Yeah, definitely all three books feel very alive. They feel very in process. And to me, at least I see them as alive for me. And I think what was really valuable for me about the City book, Our City, was I agree with you. I think City by Doug Ray is one of the, if not the best book ever written, and also about New Haven. And I wanted to prioritize. I think so. I really love reading two different kinds of books. I love reading history and I love reading science fiction. And I love reading history.
I love science
I
fiction.
love science
Are
fiction.
you an
Yeah,
Octavia Butler fan?
I love Octavia Butler and I love Ursula Le Guin.
See,
And
she goes more into fantasy.
really,
I have a problem. And Octavia Butler has one great fantasy book though, about the woman who goes back in time into slavery.
I haven't read that one.
That's her most famous
Okay,
book.
I
But
recently read The Dispossessed.
yeah,
Yeah, which is really good. Which I think is like pretty science fiction.
yeah.
But anyway, so I love reading history obviously because it's like how does the past inform our current decision making, and then sci-fi expands to me
Good
expands
sci-fi.
good sci expands. I think because this is Adrienne Brown, which I'm not sure if you've ever read her. She wrote this book called Emergent Strategy, and the one of Adrienne's premises is that in order to get to the just world we want, we have to think about an impossible world. We have to think about something that does not feel reachable right now, and that's what sci-fi does. Is it? I think it pushes the bounds of what's possible to inform the decisions we should be making today.
There's a new one. I wish I could remember his name. I just read a new one about what's going to happen when not our bodies are frozen, but our brain code.
What's it called?
And I forget. I'm gonna have to look it up afterwards. It hasn't come out yet, but we got an advanced copy. And it's about I think it's called Dodge in Hell. It's about a guy who's a video reality game designer in Seattle, who's the first person who has his brain not frozen but coded. And
Huh.
soon a whole world gets created that's like a video game with everyone's old brain codes. But there's a consciousness
Hmm.
that goes from the current world, keeping it alive with ever greater servers and farms to provide it. And the people are aware of what's happening in the world as they try to create it and get it right.
Huh.
And it was always questions about what do we become as human beings as AI and other tech advances maybe prolong life if we define life a certain way as in a new way.
Wow. Oh, I just wrote it down.
I gotta look that one up for you.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so yeah, there was a long way of saying, City was, I read City to learn more about New Haven because I knew that reading about New Haven's history was going to help me make the best decisions for myself on a personal level, and on a professional level for the city that I love. And by writing a reflection on each chapter, that was a practice of just deeply investing.
And every
in
week, like you
knowledge.
looked at one issue like racial integration or business development, you had so much to say because, in fact, you are an expert, Caroline Smith, even though you're young and you're humble about it. You are in the midst of some of the most important decisions being made in New Haven right now, and you're on the ground trying to make things happen. And you brought to that book you wrote a young, dynamic person's update on New Haven, which I found very
Definitely
interesting. I learned
evolving,
from
for
it.
sure.
Yeah.
And then which is the book that
that
I
was
made
my
with
favorite
my
one
mom.
of the three.
Yeah, and I, so I have two things, or probably three things, that are really really important to me: the city that I love and the work that I do in it, my family, my friends, and getting to know my mom and her history and how she grew up is it means in some ways similar to understanding New Haven's history, was a way of understanding it and reflecting on myself. Um, so a little background on me: my mom is a tiny, wonderful Korean lady, and my dad is a white male-bodied person from Durham, North Carolina. And my mom had always just told stories growing up of her time growing up in a very small village in Korea and the range of different experiences she had ranging from seeing all the stars come out at night to fainting in school because she didn't have enough to eat. And I she had at one point in college written a lot of these stories. She wakes up really, really early in the morning. She has a very similar routine. She wakes up really, really early in the morning. She listens to Korean classical music. And at one point in college, she wrote a lot of these stories and would send them over to us, and had always this dream of compiling them together. And I think it was an act of, for us, like understanding my mom, but an act of love, to work with my mom to put this together. And Amma is mommy in Korean.
And I mean, when you're putting together books about the Town-Gown Divide, about the city's development, about your mother, or when you're working in community, those are acts of love of trying to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you physically do these books? What's the computer program you use?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy, and a lot of credit to John Martin, who lets me borrow his InDesign. But in essence, I usually write them up and make them in Sketch, and then
I don't
and
even
then
know
I
what
use,
Sketch is, Caroline. You're talking old guy.
It's just again that sort of design platform, and then
But first, you write it as a text file.
yeah, I can write it as a text file.
Like, what do
or
you use? What program?
Google Docs, like really free,
Okay, so you write in
basic
Google Docs.
stuff.
So you go in the cloud to start.
Right, exactly.
So
and
that's
then,
again, it's generational difference.
right, to be shareable.
You don't feel like you
etc.
have to tie it to your computer on
Right,
your desk.
right.
Yeah.
And then I use a platform called Blurb, and Blurb is a self-publishing platform where you just upload a file. Once you're done with it, it can be a PDF, but also if you want it to be a little bit better dimensioned, you can do it in InDesign. And then you upload it to Blurb, and Blurb just affords you a lot of ability to create a platform where people can buy it, or you can buy it and order them. And
Just-in-time publishing. So
Yeah.
if someone wants to buy it, how does it get printed? Do you use Amazon? I know they have a service.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Blurb's
Well, there's an
back
answer
end.
because you have a book. How do you publish them?
Yeah, well, so Blurb is the publishing platform.
Oh,
So,
Blurb
yeah,
is like a competitor to Amazon
I
self-publishing.
yeah, I think so.
Well,
It
way to
must be.
go! It's great to
Yeah.
hear that not everything is Amazon.
Yeah, and so it's really, really intuitive and really easy to use. I guess I've never used Amazon, but
So anyone who gets a book, they go to Blurb.
yes,
You
and then
connect them to Blurb somehow, and then when they order it, Blurb prints it and sends it to their house.
I believe so. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, really simple, really easy to use, and highly
DIY.
recommend. Yeah.
Well, Caroline Smith, it's been great hearing about your book. Caroline Smith and Caroline Tamby Smith, and Elizabeth Larkin have a fantastic book out. Moved me when I read it, and I think that everybody we couldn't get the 14 fascinating people on the different parts of the Town-Gown Divide and in between, reflecting on how their own lives inform their view about New Haven's Town-Gown challenges, but also opportunities. Because I also think the Town-Gown relationship makes New Haven great. That's my 2 cents too. So, Caroline, why don't we bring it home by having you pick one more excerpt, and then how would people get the book?
Great.
How would they buy this book?
You can buy the book on Blurb, and I think it's blurb.com/Caroline Tamby is the website link, but I can also send it to you.
How do you Google it?
I think if you look up Caroline Smith, New Haven and Yale, it should pop up, or Blurb, New Haven and Yale.
Okay.
It should pop up.
Caroline Smith, New Haven and Yale. That's how you Google it. Or
Should pop up.
Blurb, New Haven, Yale. I had fun learning about Blurb today.
Yeah.
I'm going to be checking it out.
It's
So,
great.
Caroline Smith, what's the last excerpt you're going to read?
Definitely. I would love. Well, if Jackie's listening, I would love to read Jackie's.
All right, we're not going to repeat her last name. I
the-
love reading the book because when there are people I do know, it was so hilarious to just see them with their name, like Nadine and David and
right.
Shafiq's daughter and all that. Yeah.
So the title is Jackie Grew Up on Kensington Street.
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, Jackie's incredible. I was born and raised in New Haven. I grew up on County and Kensington Street. It was great. I walked to school, which was Baldwin for elementary, Roger Sherman. I walked to school, and we actually came home for lunch and then returned back to school. Can you imagine that today? Too many working parents and not enough family and neighborhoodly support. Our neighbors and police were like our parents. You did not want any neighbor to see you do wrong. They had the authority to place you on punishment until your parents got home, or actually give you a spanking until they got home, and you wanted neither. I don't remember having any relationship with Yale back then. It was something that I thought I could never touch. It always felt distant to me, like another town. It was clear to me that Yale was for certain types of people, and I wasn't one of them. I was a teenager when I first started hearing about programs that people like me were involved in, the Ulysses S. Grant program, the African American Cultural Center. But again, these were people who were either very smart or had some artistic talent. but I never heard of these programs advertised. It appeared that guidance counselors picked the kids they wanted to attend. I love New Haven. It gets a bad rap, but there are plenty of cultural events that go on in New Haven. The schools have gotten better in the sense that they are in new buildings. People are fighting for their communities by doing good things with children and families. The pain is the politics of this community, the politics of the Board of Ed. Some people eat and others don't. The pain of single mothers, high rents, some people eat, some don't, jobs and job training. I am very confused and frustrated about these things. Here is an example. I was unemployed. I have a BS degree in human services. I was told that I could go to Connecticut Works and become a part of the displaced worker program, and I could return to school for one of the certificate programs and it would be paid for. So I signed up and was interested in the bookkeeper certification program at Gateway Community College. But CT Works said I did not pass the placement test that they had administered. Not Gateway, but CT Works. So the person who is unemployed and needs to go to school to learn and get a job, before they can even apply under this program, they have to pass CT Works' placement test and then take another one at Gateway. I don't get it. Growing up, I always heard if you worked for Yale, hospital, or university, you had a good job. But my only experience with Yale was working for the hospital for the last 5 years. I've always stayed away. It appeared to be too much red tape and politics to enter into. Yale seems like a very large beast, and you don't know how to handle the beast or know someone who does, then you're doomed. It still seems today like Yale stands at a distance, even when I'm around the corner. I feel that students who challenge Yale to be more involved in the community or treat its workers more fairly are, for the most part, just doing something while they're in college, and it ends when their time in New Haven ends. So it all seems temporary to me, and those who make New Haven their home and believe there should be more of a connection continue to fight the good fight and feel the frustration. I feel Yale has the finances, property, and power to do great things in the community. Lately I've been thinking, what is their real responsibility to the community? Why do we feel they should do more with and for people who do not work or attend the university? The only relationship I see between the city and Yale is a political one, and none of that excites me, and it does worry me. I feel helpless and hopeless in joining these two together. Downtown New Haven is a very good example of Yale Spaces and New Haven Spaces meeting. The differences are loud and clear there. Broadway and Dixwell are another example. They come together, but you can clearly see the division. So I'm not sure Yale and New Haven meet, but they clearly divide.
Caroline Smith, that was a great choice. How to end this
Thank
program.
you, Jackie.
Caroline Tamby Smith was just reading Jackie's story, one of 14 stories of New Haveners on different parts along the town ground spectrum. The book is called New Haven and Yale, compiled by Caroline Tamby Smith and Elizabeth Larkin. You can Google Caroline Smith, New Haven and Yale, or blurb New Haven and Yale, and get the book. I think you will not be disappointed. I know Mazza Montieri Ray is not disappointed. Mazza wrote in, Caroline is awesome. This is great. Thank you for listening. Thanks everyone for listening today to Dateline New Haven. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing financial support for today's program. And thanks to the miracle man behind the controls, WNHA station manager Harry Jones. Thank you, Caroline. I love when you come in. I learned so much, and you make me feel good about the future. I know there are 100 people like Caroline Smith in New Haven, and there are, but nothing's going to stop us. The next generation's all right.
You inspire me too.
And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.